Alright, let's get started. In order to get to really high speeds when you're writing onto a computer, you're not going to use regular typing. So you're going to use what's called stenography. This is Mark Kislingbury. He writes really fast, so I can link it in the description. It's 370 words per minute. How stenography works is it's the thing that court reporters use in a courtroom to type at the speed of people talking, right? You can't write at 200 plus words per minute for hours at a time on a regular keyboard, so they made a different system of input. This is scary looking, but it's actually not that bad. It converts your keyboard, if you want to use a keyboard. There's a few different websites that you're going to want to use. This is the first one. They're all these ones are all free. I'll go through those, and this is just for learning the theory. So it takes you through all the different letters, and it just helps you get familiar with the layout. Then there's QWERTY Steno. This is where you're going to actually do your drills. For example, it gives you your hint down here. If you're actually using the website, you would just make sure this isn't selected so you can't see the hints, and then it would only show the hints when it's wrong. So then you have a reference. But in general, just for this example, like you would use your left pointing finger to write R, and then your left thumb to write A, and then your right middle finger to write P. And then you press those all at the same time like a piano, and then you get rap. If you go through the lessons, I would probably, the first time going through it, I wouldn't go through all of them at once. So I'd lower this to probably the first 3, and then you kind of like inch your way up as you get more familiar with it. And then once you get to the end, and you get to the last 3, and you're like, okay, I've gone through everything, and it's pretty familiar with me, I'm kind of comfortable with it, I'd start again, and then just go through it, like regular. Then you can go on to the next lessons. The way they have the order of things is actually really simple. Just like Art of Courting, it gives you a little rundown. So I would recommend going through these at the same time, because the actual layout, no matter what theory you use, we'll get to theories in a second, it's all the same layout. By the end of this, you'll get into this intermediate section, which is word beginnings. All you need to focus on, I would say, is word beginnings and word endings. This stuff is less important at the beginning stages, especially before you choose how exactly you want to write, which we'll get into again, because there's different theories. Like, for example, this is Plover. Plover has its own theory. Plover is just a software that you use on your computer so that it translates your keyboard input into input that imitates a stenograph. So there's different ways to translate that input into actual paper tape, right? Paper tape is just the raw output, like this, which looks like gibberish, but after a while you kind of are able to read it. There's shorter theories and there's longer theories. So if I were to give you this one, this is just a short video. I'll also link this in the description. It's the strokes per word at the top and the strokes per second on the side. So this is basically explaining that if you have, on average, 1 stroke per word at 3 strokes per second, you're going to write 180 words per minute. But that same strokes per second at 1.4 strokes per word is 130. So you'd actually have to write at 4 to 4.5 strokes per second on a longer theory in order to match that speed. So what is a long versus a short theory? So if I were to use as an example, the word California, that has 4 syllables. So a longer theory would break that up into California, but a shorter theory would just write 1 stroke for the whole word, which might take a little bit longer to remember that stroke, but in the long run you end up being a lot faster. So you get through this, you get through your intermediate word beginnings and word endings, and then here's your next resource, Typey Type. This one's really good for just learning words. You get into it. It has a very in-depth lesson progression, starting out simple, and I really recommend it. For my settings, Discover is for new words, and then I have it set to 7 words repeated 5 times, and for revision, so seen words are just any words you've seen before, without the new words. So discover, new words, revise, seen words, and I set it to 14 with 3 repetitions. If you want to do it this way, I just go between these. Like I do 1 lesson discover, 1 lesson revise. Maybe if I need more practice with a new set of words, I can practice. Of course, for this one, I've already done that lesson. So this is what it would look if you're doing a new lesson. You can also disable any hints, I believe, if you want. Right? Which I would probably recommend, because then you'll just end up using that almost like a crutch. If you want to drill, which is just more of like a practice oriented, like you've already seen the words, you just want to get a bit faster with it, then I have it set to 25, 3 repetitions, and it's new and disabled, right? Because you've already preferably seen all the words in each lesson before drilling them. Memorized words are words you've typed 30 times or more. So it's just any words that you've learned. Next up, this is the 4th and probably the final website that you're going to be using to learn steno. This one's also free, and it is Stenojig. And it gives you lots of different fun little drills to practice. Probably the one I recommend the most to a beginner is like CVC, consonant, vowel, consonant, which gives you just simple words, one by one. And these are words that are basically universal, no matter what theory you're using, because they're just so focused, right? You're going to be using 1 letter or 1 key on the left hand, 1 key in the middle, which is your thumbs, and 1 key on the right side, which is your right hand. And it just helps you get to a pretty comfortable spot with your steno. I think within a couple weeks I was up to like 60 or 70 words per minute just on these words. Just as a heads up, sometimes it unintentionally combines words if you're not careful. For example, let's say Russell, right? If you have Russ and Sell next to each other, it combines it. So then you actually have to make a new dictionary entry for that not to work, which isn't too much of a hassle. I'll link the ones that I've come across, and then you just have it in your Plover dictionaries, and then you can select it or deselect it at any time, so it doesn't get in the way when you're actually trying to write real words. Plover is free. Support is for Mac, Linux, and Windows. Then there's theories. So this is the theory that I use, which is Magnum Steno. This is from Kislingbury, and it costs $100. There's also a free one that I'm about to show you, but just in case you're interested in this one's just like a short theory that people find dependable. If you want to use it with Plover, you'd want RTF format, and then I got his full dictionary. Or let's say you're really serious about stenography, then you would get the textbook, right? If you want to buy it, make sure in the description of the order you write that you want the dictionary as well, because the dictionary actually comes with the textbook, but only if you say so. Only if you write it, right? The dictionary is like a digital file that you put into Plover, right here, steno, yeah, Magnum Steno, and it's an RTF file. But if you don't want to do that, or maybe you're not sure about steno, and you want a short theory to start out with, without having to pay any money, this one's actually a really good one, Stanley's Steno Dictionaries, and you'd want these two, Stan Main and Stan Plover. He has a lot of shorter theories, but also a bit of longer theory options in his dictionary, so you can choose. If you put it into Plover, you put the Plover one above the Stan Main one, and then it should work fine. In terms of hardware, some people just start with like a regular keyboard. This is overkill. You don't need to take off all these keys, but you'd want to take off the spacebar. At least the spacebar would get in the way of those bottom 4 keys, right? These 4 keys, that would be the bottom row of your letters. But if you want something that's more dedicated to stenography as a long-term option, there's a good video that I'll link in the description by Eric. This guy knows a lot about steno, and he just goes through any of the hardware options that are kind of available on the market, just taking you through a little guide. There's the Plank. I'm not sure if you've heard of the Plank, but maybe if you're a mechanical keyboard enthusiast, this one's not a bad one. if you do use it for steno, then it'd probably be better to split the spacebar in the middle, right? Because you want 4 keys at the bottom. And he mentions it in the video. Eric mentions, I think, this drop version. So there's all these different options and goodies. You'll probably want a plate along with it just to keep the switches in place. Technically, some people go plateless on builds, but in general, it's probably best to buy a plate as well if you end up going this route. I use what's called a Libra Mini. It's like a more compact style keyboard. It's not ortholinear. So ortholinear is like a plank. So see how all the keys are lined up, which is what you want, right? These are lined up with each other because when you're writing with steno, you might have to write with your finger on both of these at once, both of these keys at once. So in general, that's recommended. I find that with my keyboard, it's completely fine. Like the Alice, they call it an Alice layout, where there's a small slant at the top here as part of the layout, and it actually fixes the stagger. So I find that I don't have a problem writing steno on this keyboard. Eric mentions in his video that if you're using a regular keyboard, you can flip the top row of the keys just so they're a bit closer together and easier to write. If you are interested in that, I have a video on how to make a Libra Mini build. The only difference that I've learned since then is if you want, you don't need these little pads at the top. Like you can put it underneath at the bottom and it still works, which I find kind of aesthetic. Which I think that's the way that you're supposed to do it, but either way, I find it looks fine. I'll also link that. In terms of switches, you want more light springs. If you have like 70-gram springs on your mechanical keyboard build or something, it might be a little bit tiring for your hands if you go for an extended period of time. So there's a couple options that are pretty cheap that I would recommend. I've used these ones myself. So there's a tactile version, and then there's a linear version. These are both silent, and they're 45 to 50 grams. I find that they're pretty dependable for use as a steno keyboard switch, or if you want even lighter springs than that, there are even up to 25 grams. That's what I'm using right now, and I like it a lot, but the bottom out gets kind of crunchy, right? Because these switches weren't really meant for springs that were that light, right? Like when I write without steno on and I'm just writing like a regular keyboard, it's still fine. But if I push hard on my switches, then it's kind of crunchy, like crunchy peanut butter or something. But overall, you don't have to do that. If you do want to spring swap, then you definitely want to save yourself a lot of trouble and get yourself a switch opener as well. Overall, that's basically everything you need to learn steno. I have some resources as well. I put together the first 100 multi-word briefs. So, for example, these ones are used a lot in English. So instead of writing of the with 2 different strokes, you'd write it in 1 stroke. So I took the StenoJig software and put in my own lessons and edited it a bit. So there's lessons without time and there's lessons with maybe 1 to 3 minutes. This one's free, so if you want to check it out, you can. It has a startup guide included and also a JSON file for if you want to just use the briefs that I'm using, you can just put it straight into your Plover software. I use Anki to help me learn different briefs. Anki is just like if you haven't heard of Anki, it's a flashcard software and it is amazing. It's also free and you just can practice each brief one at a time. And then it uses spaced repetition, so every so often it brings that review back to you and it helps you just retain the information faster. So that would look like here, all these here. In terms of briefs, you don't need to go overboard, right? So this is just a small graph. I was just using some data analysis stuff of the top 10,000 most frequent multi-word briefs that could be used in the language, right? just to see like what is the most effective use of your time. And probably around the first 5,000 is good. I mean, after that, you're already at like 85%. But if you want to one stroke everything, that's also fine. Like people who get really fast, they basically write everything in one stroke. But even if you want to only write one stroke for the first 1,000, you're still getting like almost half of the frequency, at least for the first 10,000. So it's pretty good yield at the beginning. If you wanted a quick look at that, is here. So it's in the Anki software, and you'd preview it, and you'd have the word at the front, and then you'd have an input option as well. The way I have it set up is that you'd study all of the briefs on Anki on the first day, and then you drill all the words as well, just to get as familiar with all of the words as fast as possible. And then over the next, it doesn't have to be 7 days, but this is just how I set it up. You'd complete all the flashcard reviews just to keep going through the briefs, and then you'd do some speed building drills, 20 words at a time, and then on the last day you'd do all 100. This is without time, so you can just write on this as long as you want, and you'd write it in groups, right? So out of would be one stroke. There's also a more in-depth version I made with a few more lessons. So that would take you through the first 5,000 multi-word phrases and multi-syllabic words. So the difference between these is multi-word is more than one, so between 2 and 5 words, and then multi-syllabic is one word but more than one syllable. Because again, you can choose if you want to write a word in more than one stroke, if it's more than one syllable. But if you want to write shorter, then you would learn a single stroke for each word. And then there's some contractions here that you can also learn. I just took basically all of the contractions that you'd need to learn in English, just so you can practice them and write them all in one stroke. The way that I generally practice is that you do any flashcard reviews for the day, and you'd study new briefs using your flashcards. So you just do some new reviews for your Anki, and then you'd speed build using the same words. So they're in groups of, right, 20, 25. So you do 20 to 25 words on Anki and then drill them on the drilling software. You can choose probably untimed lessons at the beginning. Like in general, like whatever you're using to practice, you're probably going to be kind of slow at the beginning. So you don't want to be halfway through a practice drill and then you get cut off because you take too long. And then just in general, Anki is pretty effective. If you're interested in that, it's in the description as well. Yeah, I think that's basically everything though. If you went through this video, then you know you're well on your way to learning how to write at 300 words per minute. Like a true keyboard wizard. If you do import through Anki, make sure you import any deck presets. I have a small text file of startup instructions if you end up downloading from my website. In general for Anki, this is just some extra goody stuff. Basically, you know everything already, but I really prefer removing the easy and hard buttons on Anki, and then also using the FSR itself helper, which is just basically a better algorithm for Anki, so you don't have to do as many reviews. When I use my keyboard, again, you can see that these bottom 4 keys are C, V, N, and M, which is exactly what you want to imitate the stenography keyboard, like the steno type. That's everything. If you have any questions as well, you can ask me in the comments. If you ever get confused about setting up something or about stenography in general, I should be able to help you out. If you do end up getting my thing, and in like 3 months, you're like, I don't really like this, I'm not super excited. Like I only want your money if I'm giving you value. So if you're not like, this is amazing, by the end of those 3 months, just let me know and I'll give you a refund. That's everything though. So now you can learn this beautiful input method. You can wow all of your friends by beating them in your typing tests and be the talk of the town. All right, see ya.